Why don't we try to, we've talked about sample return versus going there and investigating there. How would you pro or con for either one?
Right now, I'm for sample return, and I base that on the experience we just had with the Phoenix lander. Phoenix went to Mars, scooped up some dirt. You remember how hard it was to get the dirt through the screen, okay, because the dirt had salt in it, unexpectedly sticky, couldn't get it through the screen. Eventually we got it through the screen, and then the instrument, the thermal evolved gas analyzer, effectively didn't work because the dirt had perchlorate in it, which is what they use in solid rocket boosters. It's perfectly good salt, but at high temperature it explodes. And so, which is why it's useful as a solid rocket fuel, but it's not useful in an instrument. Right? So the instrument, and it reacted with the nickel on the walls of the oven, and it was just a big mess. So the net result is we got no data, really, from that instrument. Now, if that sample had been in Earth, there's perchlorate in it. Okay, give it to a grad student, rinse the sample, bring it back. 30 minutes later, we're ready to go. Right? And it's an example of how hard it is to do science when you've got to write down all your moves in advance and you're not allowed to deviate from them. And if suddenly you come across something unexpected, even if it's trivial, you don't have the flexibility to change it. And so I'm thinking that back in the days when spacecraft were just telescopes, looking, that didn't matter. But now when we're in the mode of science where we're trying to pick up dirt and play with the dirt, we're going to hit unexpected things that are going to stymie in situ experimentation. So it's time to bring the dirt home.
It sounds like, though, you're still saying we need to bring the dirt to the person. Right. We could take the person to the dirt,
yes,
or the
exactly,
dirt
exactly. Yeah, we need the flexibility that comes with a person in a lab, where you can change what you do, you can change, based on results, you can change the protocol and change the instrumentation. Why don't we take one more question, and then we'll go to the panel, where I think we'll broaden the discussion about how to move forward and the role of NASA and private sector. So maybe one more question, if there is one more question. And then Rick will come up and we'll do the panel.
All right, so you just said there was perchlorate in the sand, and so then it ruined the experiment, but I think it's a little extreme to say you got no data because you got a very outrageous data point that you didn't even expect.
Okay, that was from a different instrument, actually, that didn't get ruined by that perchlorate. So there was two instruments on Phoenix, the wet chemistry lab and the thermal evolved gas analyzer. The wet chemistry lab detected the perchlorate. The thermal evolved gas analyzer basically failed because of the perchlorate, and we wouldn't have even known why it failed if we didn't have the results from the wet chemistry analysis. So it's kind of funny because we work in the Atacama Desert where there's plenty of perchlorate, plenty of salts, and they can do all these. We have issues similar like to this with samples on Earth, but we based on the results, we change the protocol. Never do we go into the field and actually execute the protocol that we thought we were going to execute before we went. Now, maybe it's just because we're dullards and not good at planning, and that's true. But still, the flexibility to be able to change what you're doing based on what you found is a fundamental requirement, really, especially when you're dealing with soils as opposed to telescopes, because then all you do is observe. When we move from observers to manipulators, which is what space's science needs to do, move from observers to manipulators, we've got to change. It's just not working. Okay, last question here. Sorry. This will be the last question.
So just to follow up, how big a lab, how flexible a lab would you have to send to have that flexibility? How much stuff?
Well, you don't need a lot of stuff. A tricorder, a sink, and a fume hood, I'd be happy. But seriously, in terms of a tricorder, some basic analytical instrumentation like we take on field trips. It's sort of things like dissolved gas analyzers, like Phoenix, a differential thermal analysis, but the critical thing you need is the ability to process the samples before you do the experiment. So that is not so much a bunch of stuff as it is a capability. A sink, basically it's a small wet lab. And glasses glassware, source of clean water, and some standard chemicals from a kid's chemical set, so that you can titrate acids and titrate bases and neutralize whatever, change the, whatever problem you come across, you can come up with a solution and work it. So we're not talking about fancy, heavy equipment, but you're talking about the flexibility of having somebody there to do it. That's the hard part. Okay, I'll turn control back over to the moderator.